Done. The easiest yes for me, a no-brainer. That's the message a client sent me less than 24 hours after our growth optimization call. No hard sales tactics, no pressure, no convincing her to buy, a simple and easy yes that actually feels good for the both of us. This is what transformational experts are after, a conversion process that prioritizes empowering people to an easy yes without long drawn out DMs or sales calls, without high pressure or pain point heavy bro tactics, and without getting friend zoned or ghosted. So, what's the secret, the magic sauce to converting conversations? That's all inside today's episode. Now, hey, and welcome back to the Business Real Talk. On this episode, we're going to talk about what it means to convert conversations so that you're not getting in the friend zone and instead you're getting easy yeses, all without high pressure conversations or long drawn out DMs or sales calls. Now, here's the hard truth. Sales conversations don't need to be difficult. They don't need to be complex. They don't need to be this thing that make us want to rip our hair out. But the reality is, so often for so many business owners, this is the case. And as a result, we see people trying to solve the wrong problems. They're running ads or spending more time on organic traffic, trying to increase their conversions and not seeing the results they want. Or they feel like they're spending so much time in the DMs and hiring another set or bringing someone else on to support them only because they can't seem to figure out where the break in the process is. Now, the reality is it's a lot more simple than that when you understand what I'm going to share with you here today about really honing in on the sales conversation flow and understanding the key components that literally drive conversions in the most organic and natural ways. Now, the reality is nobody would argue that conversations are the pathway to more conversions. And the most successful business owners will tell you that they prioritize strategic conversations so that they can drive more sales in their business. Now, the problem is having conversations at scale can be tricky, especially if those conversations aren't creating an ROI as often as we'd like. Because let's get real, nobody wants to spend hours in the DMs or hours on sales calls. That's nobody's idea of fun. What we need to be able to do is be strategic and create high converting sales conversations that move people naturally through the buying process without feeling like you're hand holding them or dragging them throughout that. And when done correctly, you have people saying, oh my gosh, yes, let's get on a call. I would love to hear about working together. And when you're on those calls, you're getting on calls with highly qualified and eager clients who practically throw their money at you. So let's get into it and talk about the magic sauce to those easiest sales conversations that actually convert. Now, the reality is some people have a little bit of PTSD around sales conversations, especially around DMs. Now, why is that? Now, there was a period in time where there was this very heavy push for mass quantity messages, especially with outbound messages for years. And many business owners found themselves paying tens of thousands of dollars for programs that promised premium clients in droves every month, but failed to disclose that it required them to either outbound message hundreds of people a week or even a day, or hire a setter to DM hundreds of people. Now, the purpose was that conversations equal cash, right? And more conversations equals more cash, right? And on paper, that seems to make sense, but the reality is we're working backwards. Instead of building demand through your marketing, you're stacking conversations. It was kind of the easy way to more money without doing the harder but more sustainable work of actually creating a marketing system that developed demand. Now, the problem was there were no real controls in place. And when you're playing the numbers game, the reality is you're not concerning yourself with how qualified those leads are. You're not determining if they need the support you offer. Heck, you're not even giving them enough information beforehand to know what they're getting into. And as a result, you're getting on sales calls with people who need to be convinced, and you're spending all of this time burning through leads and your audience while inadvertently tarnishing your reputation in the process. It's messy for sure. And a lot of business owners got fed up and honestly got burnt out. They shied away from selling their premium and transformational offers and looked for other ways to get away from that mass quantity outbound message. Now, they were using things like low ticket ascension models or massive live and virtual events, anything and everything that would allow them to completely avoid sales conversations and the PTSD it had left on them. The truth is, It doesn't have to be this difficult. Setting up an inbound conversation system is worlds different than outbound. And I'm not going to go into tons of detail about that today. Know that we're going to create a next episode talking about the key things that actually allow you to create an inbound conversation system that drives real and ready people into your world who are asking for the next step of working with you. Now, first, we need to start with understanding that the first piece of this puzzle in creating those high converting conversations at scale is that we do not want to start this under pressure, because a conversation that started under pressure, either from you or your team just trying to reach KPIs or to try and do the right things to try and stay afloat, stays under pressure. It becomes extremely difficult to turn a pressurized conversation into a productive one. And you're working against the person that you're speaking to and their brain's natural desire. Think of it this way. What's your first reaction when you get a cold DM? You cringe. You brace yourself for the inevitable and uncomfortable pitch. And it doesn't really matter if what they're talking to you about is something you actually need. You're going in with this negative relationship to the conversation itself. It's like a school bully insulting you every single day and then turning around and asking to date you. You're like, no thanks, take a hike. But listen, I'm not trying to talk smack about outbound conversations as a whole. What I want you to really understand is that the premise behind mass messaging and just getting into conversations for the sake of sales is what's ultimately flawed. We want to be able to flip the script. We want to move away from the quantity of conversations and focus on the quality of them. And to nail a high quality conversation that actually gets an ROI, you need to understand the power of strategic timing. Now, quick story, when I was 15, I had a major crush on this popular guy named Tom. He was nice, he was funny, and a great soccer player, and it had all the makings of a 15-year-old crush. Now, I didn't want him to know I had a crush on him, naturally, because I had no idea if the feelings were mutual. So for weeks, I would totally avoid him. If I saw him walking down the hall, I'd turn and go the other way. When we were both walking to practice and he'd look over, I pretended like I was talking to a friend. If you didn't know any better, you'd think that I hated him. And I was so awkward around him. For weeks, this went on until one week he didn't try to say hi on our way to practice and he sat at a different table in class. I didn't think much of it, but later that week, my friends and I had gotten invited to a party at a senior's house. I knew that he'd be there because the guy throwing the party was the captain of the soccer team. So I got ready and I told my friends that night that that would be the night. That would be the night I would tell him I had a crush on him. It was finally time. But fast forward between having a pit in my stomach all night, fighting back the nerves of admitting my crush, combined with having a few drinks, and everything hit the fan. I was passed out in the upstairs bathroom. Now, I begged my friend to tell Tom to come to the bathroom. I was determined to get my feelings off my chest and tell him about my crush. She tried to talk me out of it for good reason, but I was convinced that it was now or never. So as he walked in the bathroom, I blurted it out. Tom, I have a crush on you and I have for a really long time. All the words just seemed to come right out as I sat on the bathroom floor. And he looked right at me like a deer in headlights and said, "What? I've tried to talk to you for weeks and you wouldn't give me the time of day. I was convinced that you weren't into me. So I asked Katie out last week and we're together now." I was too late. That was the moment that I realized that timing was everything. And that couldn't be more true, even in our sales conversations. Strategically timing the flow of a sales conversation is one of the most overlooked and, yes, integral pieces in moving leads naturally to an easy yes. Think of it this way. Right now, there's one of two things happening. Either one, you're forcing the conversation. You're trying to meet and match your agenda, which is where conversations get stuck because they feel pressured or uncomfortable. So people shut down and it looks like you get ghosted in the DMs, or the prospect tries to rush off the phone call or tunes you out because they're just not interested. Or you're spending too much time trying to build rapport or prove your value, which is where conversations end up getting friend zoned. And it looks like people wasting your time to try and pick your brain or dragging you along, making it seem like they're interested, but only to say that right now is not the right time or I need more time. Now, the reality is both stem from the same problem. Your conversation lacks a natural progression. You're either white knuckling the whole conversation, trying to control the flow so it fits your script, or you're giving up all control in the conversation, letting your leads direct the conversation, which makes it nearly impossible for you to establish and maintain credibility and leadership in the conversation. Neither of which give you what you want, which is to have a productive and high converting sales conversation, sans the ick. So remember, we want to look at our sales conversations from the aspect of having quality conversations, not just a large quantity of them. So strategic timing removes this mismatch of control that takes a conversation off track. And there are three key phases of strategic timing within a high converting conversation. Number one is initiating the conversation. Number two is resolving the gap. And number three is positioning the pitch. These are the three major phases within that conversation. So they set the tone for whether or not you'll be hearing the person across from you chomping at the bit to try and get to move through that sales conversation or completely tapering off or tuning you out. So let's start with initiating the conversation. Now, recently I had a client who told me that her sales calls were lasting over an hour. When I listened back to some of the recordings, I realized that she was spending over 20 minutes on small talk. Now, the problem was that small talk was costing her the conversation. People were friend zoning her without even realizing it because the conversation had stayed off track and it was really difficult to bring it back. First impressions are everything, and it's how you initiate the conversation that will ultimately set the tone for where and how things will proceed. This is why when my clients come to me, one of the key things that we do is actually initiate the conversation in a way that is quickly building rapport, but also creates a directive of you being the leader and taking control of that call. Now, the second piece of the puzzle is resolving the gap. This is arguably one of the most important pieces of the sales conversation. It's ultimately what's going to set you up to establish your credibility while actually giving people that aha moment that makes them an instant believer. This is vital. And after watching hundreds of client calls and DM conversations, I found that most people would do one of two things. They'd either ask a million questions and then move straight into the pitch where it felt completely disjointed and there was no opportunity to develop on the credibility, or they'd identify the gap for their clients, but then they'd spend so much time trying to coach or convince people about what they're talking about that the person across from them was so overwhelmed they couldn't even fathom saying yes to the offer because all they could think about is getting off that call and thinking through what you'd already said. Now, the third and final piece is positioning the pitch. The reality is, everything you do throughout a sales conversation should be naturally positioning the pitch. That means that by the time you share your offer, they should be foaming at the mouth, so ready to buy that they're begging you for the next step. Every step until then has set them up for your pitch to be that logical answer to their growing desire. It's like a well orchestrated dance that looks like two partners that are moving together on the beat. You're moving in sync, you're anticipating each other's moves, keeping up with the rhythm of conversation. And then all of a sudden, that dip, timed perfectly, just brings it all together. So let me give you a real life example. Now, my client came to me struggling with low conversions. Her team was spending hours in DMs and her sales calls were lasting over an hour each, but her conversions were dismal and hovering around 20 to 30%. Now, she wasn't doing anything quote unquote wrong, but the flow of the conversation was off. So, what I did is I quickly combed through her team's DMs and two of the calls that she had, and I spotted it almost immediately. Here's what was happening. First, the conversation initiation was off. We talk about timing. Now, what was happening is she was getting inbound leads through her content, but the problem was by the time they got into that conversation, instead of initiating that conversation from where the content had left off, they were jumping straight into the questions and actually severing that relationship. What happens is when we're not delivering on the last piece that we left off on and where the promise was in her content marketing itself, it severed the trust and made people feel like they were in this chokehold to answer questions just to get to the resource they had been promised. Now, what we did was we actually solved two things within that. Number one, we shifted the tone within the content itself. By repositioning the next step within her call to action, it actually preceded the conversation. That meant instead of trying to drag people and beg them to get into that conversation, people were coming into that conversation excited about that next step. Now, the next thing we did is we started delivering the resource first. Now, this is important because by delivering the resource first and then asking permission for the next step, we noticed that people were actually moving through the conversation faster because they felt like they were being supported rather than being seen as just another number in the process of what they were trying to do. The results were astounding. In her DMs alone, we saw that she went from 20% of people taking her up on that next step and moving through the flow of conversation to now 60% of people moving through that flow of conversation. As a result, the people who were booking calls were now eager and pre sold. This is important because the reality is most people fail to understand the role of each piece within the client acquisition puzzle. So while the three phases of strategic timing really land within the actual sales conversation, the reality is the way we set the expectations for those three phases happens well before you even start a conversation. That's why it's so important to understand that when you look at the conversion process, you have to look at it holistically. It's not just about one singular piece. In this case, my client was trying to solve the wrong problem. the call. But the call wasn't actually the problem. It was that when we understood and could look at it holistically, we realized that the break was actually in the expectation she was setting before she got there. Therefore, creating the right strategic timing meant we had to look at how we actually built that expectation before the conversation started. So in her case, the issue started all the way in her content, then led to her DM process, and ultimately led to lowering her conversions on the call itself. I can't stress this enough. If you've been looking at your acquisition piece by piece, but not as a whole, you're leaving so much money and time on the table. So often, the biggest optimization point is hidden within the layers of the process. It's the main reason we talk so much about compounding results and understanding that it's not just about lead generation, marketing, content, sales calls, conversions, or messaging. It's about all of them. It's about how those things actually work together within your ecosystem to drive the ultimate result. So, strategically timing each piece so it lines up together is where empires are built, and thought leaders and transformative experts are able to operate in their genius without becoming marketing or sales ninjas. So, obviously, strategic timing matters. And what makes conversations turn into your sales superpowers is knowing how to combine strategic timing with trust, but not just any trust, foundational trust. Now, we've all done it. We've had to hire someone to come fix something in the house, whether it's your windows need repairing, your floors need fixing, you need to paint the walls, whatever it is, we've brought someone in to support us with that. Now, one of the biggest things that happen when it goes to hiring a service provider is that you don't know who to trust. So you go and interview several people, try to weigh which one sounds like they're making more sense, and ultimately making a decision based on who's built the most trust in that process. For us, recently, our ice machine stopped working. So we called dozens of people, brought in different people, and each of them had a different way to approach it, leaving us feeling like we didn't know who to believe until the last person. When this person came in, he sat down and explained not only what he was going to be doing, but why he was going to be doing that, and ultimately allowed us to see the full picture of what was happening so that we can get the right results, ultimately leading to easily paying $740 for having him do the work, even if it was more expensive than anyone else, because it felt like we had inherent trust. The reality is that foundational trust is what's going to set the tone of a productive conversation. One where both you, the business owner, and the prospective client are coming in with mutual intent. It's not faking a coffee chat that's actually a veiled attempt at selling your offer. And it's not pretending that you just want to connect and collaborate in the DMs, only waiting for you to have that chance to pitch. It's mutually built buying relationship where both parties come in with reciprocal intent. Let me repeat that because that is by and far one of the most important things I want you to take away from this episode. That it's a mutually built buying relationship where both parties come in with reciprocal intent. Imagine that. A sales conversation that doesn't need to masquerade as anything else, and that people actually want to partake in. Because the difference between feeling like you're being sold to or being thankful for being offered the perfect solution is having reciprocal intent and creating foundational trust. It's like having a handshake with a person that you feel like you've known for a lifetime. No awkward silences, no trying to find a way to sneak the next step. It's conversational and connected. You feel completely at ease saying yes. Heck, it often feels like the only logical thing to do. Just like my client who got on a call and said, Naz, I have literally never said yes so fast in my life, and yet it feels so easy and so logical. That's what we want our clients to feel. But the reality is, so often we're using a process that actually creates the opposite effect. So, what we need to really be looking at is what needs to happen in order to get people to make buying decisions that feel good, but don't require us to try and dance around the topic in order to get them there. Quick story, 6 years ago, I walked into an animal feed store thinking that I just look at the chicks they had. Okay. I had decided that I wanted to have a backyard chickens, but I didn't know the first thing about how to raise them. So I packed up the car with my three kids and decided to go to the feed store so we could just look at the chicks and start seeing what we might need in order to plan for this new adventure. Within 40 minutes, I walked out of the store with chicken feed, a whole chick kit, and six chickens. I was sold in under an hour on a 10-year commitment. The truth is, sales isn't complicated when there's a foundation of trust. I walked out confidently having bought six chicks because I was fully ready. No pressure, no feeling rushed, but just fully ready. And that's the reality. When we're working with clients, the goal isn't to push them to a decision, it's accelerating that decision. You've heard me say that before. And the key to accelerating that decision is, do they have the necessary information that builds a foundation of trust? It doesn't overwhelm them, it doesn't pressure them, it doesn't try to add fake FOMO to the process. It allows them to feel like, well, why wouldn't I do this? That's what we want our clients to feel. It's like saying yes becomes the easiest thing ever. So, how do we go about setting up a simple and comfortable process that lets them feel like yes is the only logical answer? So, here's the simple formula: compounding confirmation plus visualized success equals effortless conversions. Now, I want you to think about it this way: people come in with a predisposed belief. The goal isn't to try and underhand a decision or interest that isn't already there. The goal is to accelerate that decision, right? We do that with our sales conversations when they're started from a place of confirming that intent rather than forcing it. So now, rather than starting a DM conversation that's trying to push people into something without them knowing it, we start from a place of, yes, I'd like more information. I'd like to move through this process. So let's break it down. If you understand that people are coming in with that predisposed belief, how can you ensure that your process up until that point is setting them up for that feeling? So it's your choice if you want to start a conversation from a place of, yes, this is the logical next thing I want to do, or I just got here somehow, but I'm not really sure. That starts through your content, right? That starts by you allowing them to see, just like I shared with my client, letting them see what that next step is and driving that next decision so that by the time you're going to deliver a resource, they know that the next logical step is a conversation because you've predisposed that information in your process. And this can happen consciously or subconsciously, but our goal is that by the time they're getting into that sales conversation, whether that's in DM or on a call, they're coming in with a confirmation of what they already want. You're just building on that confirmation. So again, for me, I didn't walk into the chick store and buy 6 chicks because this person was the best salesperson ever or I felt pressured. Not at all. Instead, it was that I already knew I'd want those chickens, but now I was given the right information and I came in with this predisposition of a belief that this was what I needed if I had that right information, that naturally it just progressed until that next step. Your conversations need to be started with somebody coming in with that intent, coming in with the predisposition of a belief that not only do I want this thing, but I want to know the next step. Your content is what drives that first step within the process. We're not trying to sell ice to an Eskimo. That's not what we're after. What we're trying to do is set up a process that literally creates a natural movement towards the sales process because it is literally the logical next step. We feel like we've been given the thing we needed. We confirmed that belief of, okay, they gave me what I needed. And the next step is just building upon that. So again, in your sales conversations with you and your content, we're just moving them through that. So by the time you're getting on a call with someone, they should already be saying, I've been looking forward to this call all week. Not, I don't know what this call is for. I have no idea how to prepare. That's where things go wrong. You're compounding on that conversation, not creating a Hail Mary that we hope the sales conversation is going to pick up where it needs to. And that in of itself is a culmination of the process you've produced that drives that sales conversation to get what you need. That's why when we work with our clients, we're looking at the entire process and ensuring that their content is literally confirming that initial belief that, yes, this is exactly what I need. And by the time the sales conversation is now started, it's meeting that need exactly where it is. And everything that happens thereafter is just confirming that need, is moving along that decision naturally. So, my question to you is your process currently set up to really confirm that natural belief that's already there and compound that process for them, all the way from the first time they're introduced to you to every step that builds upon it in order to create that conversion? Ultimately, that's what's going to drive having an easy and effortless sales process, is knowing how all of those pieces come together. So with our clients, we're looking at it from all the way from how our messaging is speaking to that initial intent and driving the right people into your pipeline, all the way to looking how your content is developing that intent, turning it into a demand in the sales conversation in DMs, and ultimately how those DM conversations are leading to the sales conversion on a call itself. The next step is visualize success. Now, here's the deal. If someone cannot feel and see for themselves that the promise you're making makes sense to them, they will not buy. I don't care if you're the best salesperson on the entire earth. If you are telling them and explaining to them what your process does, but they can't see it. They can't feel it for themselves. They can't breathe that in and think, oh my gosh, I can't live without this. They can't visualize what that would look like in their lives. It will never, ever work. Now, the reason our calls last about 30 minutes and my clients' calls last about 30 minutes aren't because we're great at sales. It's because we understand human behavior. We recognize not only what they're naturally progressing towards, but what's happening in their minds before they're even able to verbalize it. Okay. That is my job. That is what your job as a business owner is to support them through that process and allow them to be able to visualize that while they're going through this. I'll give you a great example. Okay. One of the most simple questions that we ask within that process is we ask people 6 months from now, if everything went according to plan, what would business and life look like? Now, on paper, this question seems very basic, like just something that you add into the process. But the reality is, the reasoning and how we actually leverage this is to help them visualize their success. So I go on to then take the information they've shared with me and explain why I've asked that question. And I'll say, listen, the reason I'm asking this question is so often we create a business that gives us what we want, but it's not fitting into our lifestyle. And ultimately, it's knowing how to combine the two together that allows us to create a freedom based business where we're developing the right strategies, the right systems, and the right business model that meets our specific needs. In doing that, not only am I confirming for them what their belief already is that they need a business that allows them to achieve that, I'm also creating massive authority. But ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm pulling that information from what their visualized version of success looks like and bringing that into how my process actually feeds that visualized success for them. Meaning, when they share that they want to travel every summer for a month, I can specifically bring that back to how within my process I'm helping them achieve that specific result. That means that no longer do they have to wonder, is this actually going to help me achieve what I want to? They're going to know without a shadow of a doubt exactly how and what is going to allow them to achieve that, allowing them to make decisions that seem completely effortless. That is the goal. When someone can sit there and at the end of the call or at the end of a conversation say, I can see this for myself. I absolutely know that this is going to work for me. That's when we create easy yeses. It's you being able to give them the gift of being able to solve that for themselves when they may not even be able to verbalize it at this point. That is why I'm so passionate about the ECS method, why I talk about this nonstop for you guys. It's because it truly takes a compounding process of understanding the ease and the natural flow of what it takes to not only convert your clients, but be able to retain them. And it's looking at human behavior from a holistic approach and how do we actually create those conversions and retention and serve our clients in the highest possible way so that it actually is an easy yes. It's not just a term we use. We eat, sleep, and breathe this. And it starts with understanding that this comes from knowing how to win the market. You don't want to compete for attention. You don't want to be in a space where you're fighting against saturation and trying to stay top of mind and doing all the things that people teach you to try and be one of many options out there. Instead, it's about carving out a space of your own, becoming a market of one, a true market of one, one where people come to you. You're creating inbound demand. And we do this by developing your innovative gap methodology. Simply put, this allows us to understand the unsolved and untapped opportunities within your market and exactly how you can solve for this, connecting between what their desires are and exactly how you innovate a place in the market that makes you the only solution. This step alone allows my clients to charge 5 to 10 times more than they used to and having people run to work with them because they know that they're the only solution to their problems. Now, the next step is having a bingeable decision system. Ultimately, we understand that we want people to be able to naturally say yes without feeling like they're pressured every step of the way. And that means giving them a bingeable process that allows them to get to that decision as if it's as easy as them binging their way through a season of Bridgerton. That is what we're trying to do is develop a process that's so natural that allows them to sell themselves throughout the process. And we use our Netflix effect bingeable style system that allows you to automate the conversion process and have people saying, yes, please, without you needing to handhold them or push them any step of the way. Now, the third and final piece is results and retention. The reality is you need to be able to deliver on that promise. I'm so tired of seeing a market where all we talk about is marketing and sales, but we don't actually speak to the delivery of the promise you're making. I believe that building a reputation that outlasts your business, creating a legacy where it lives on past when you're here, and being able to create a business model that allows you to serve massive clients at scale without feeling like you're giving up your freedom or giving up results in order to get there. And that's why we focus on results and retention, which allows you to create a delivery system that actually drives results at scale. And as always, I want to invite you to the next steps. If you've listened to today's episode and you're ready to see how the easiest method can be applied within your business, I want to invite you to a growth optimization call. On this call, you and I will chat about what your current client acquisition looks like. I'll share with you exactly where I see the biggest opportunity points for you to be able to take that to scale and where you're leaving money on the table. And I'll show you how the easiest method can be applied within your business. Here's the truth: I can't make offers to everyone. As you heard me state in my last episode, it has to be that we truly believe that we can drive results for you. So this call is meant for me to be able to determine whether or not we believe this is the right fit. And if we do, we'll share the next best step on which program is the best fit. So if you're ready to book your call, head on over to easiestleads.com/call. But if you're new around here, and you just want to learn a little bit more about how the easiest method works, first of all, we're so excited to have you and welcome. If you want to learn how our 3-step process works using the Netflix effect to get leads to sell themselves, head on over to easiestleads.com to check out our free bingeable series that breaks this down. Now, as always, we love and appreciate if you could take 1 minute out of your busy day to go rate and share your feedback on this podcast episode, wherever it is you're listening to. And if you find that someone else might benefit from this episode, we'd love to have you take a second and share this as well. But until next time, here's to keeping it real.